Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be redesigning Rochelle Goyle. This was a really fun one to do. Rochelle has always been a very special character to me. She was one of the first Monster High dolls I ever got as a kid, so I really wanted to do justice to her design and incorporate a lot of little details. First off, this mood board I had a lot of Gothic architecture and real gargoyles, obviously, because I wanted to take inspiration from that. And I wanted her fashion style to be coquette because I felt that was very appropriate if you were to modernize Rochelle's design. I feel like that was what she would wear. So starting out with her baseline design, I wanted her to be heavy set because I always imagined her being that way since her diary mentions that she's heavy because she's made of stone. I also wanted to incorporate how she mentioned having a chip on her shoulder into her design. And I gave her slightly larger wings, but generally the same sort of bat-like shape. And I debated giving her a tail or not, and went with it in the end. Also gave her some little horns and moved her ears to the side of her head instead of the top. And I wanted her horns to be really, really detailed. I followed the design of one of the gargoyles that were designed to be a gutter because they are a big association with water in terms of architecture. So I wanted to incorporate some webbing into her clawed hand as well to give reference to that. So sketching out the little bases here and a larger one to compile all the designs onto. I really like how her hands turned out in particular. Very sort of like paw-like. I wanted to go with the design there. So I have the base sketch out in pink and I'm sketching out the dress designs in blue. First up, just going with a pretty simple little new silhouette style dress. Very lacy and layered. Her hair, I definitely wanted to change up a little bit because I feel like her having like really long hair sort of like conflicted with the wings, with her silhouette a little bit. So I definitely wanted to go with something that was a little bit shorter. And so I was debating giving her a bob or having like these long tendrils in the front or a little flip. For the second outfit, I went with a little sort of like plaid suit dress with some very chunky heels. And I also wanted to give her her purse accessory, since I am trying to be more mindful of designing accessories as I go along here. For the third look, I went with this more sort of like open, very like boned look on the outer sort of skirt with a tighter underskirt. And I also had the idea of giving her a big scarf. And the next one I also played around with her having a little bow around her neck, very French. I also wanted to play around with structure in these designs because she is based off of gargoyles and Gothic architecture, so I wanted to play around with different like boning techniques and just creating structure in her outfits instead of having them be so loose and flowy, which is what I was playing with in this design here. I also wanted to give her, there's that little bow I was talking about, wanted to test out giving her a little cover up here, a little jacket. An interesting challenge, I guess, is that I wanted to keep her design very strong and simple, and also have her have a sort of paler color scheme than my typical redesigns. This ended up being, I'm pretty sure, the first redesign I've done that didn't have green in the palette. That's kind of my go-to color, so it was fun having to figure out how to make a color palette look good while not just bumping the saturation all the way up like the way I usually do. So just making my little list here of what the options I like best so that way I can combine them into the final mode at the bottom. I had a lot of fun designing all the different sort of shoe types for her because I feel like the silhouette of her OG shoes are very iconic and I especially love her socks, and so I wanted to incorporate that into the design as well. So I wanted to have her have a sweetheart neckline with this sort of new silhouette-esque type 50s looking silhouette, but with like lace around the edge and like this big bone. And I later changed it from being sort of like this like lacy silhouette into having them be shaped more sort of like bat wings, so that way it is more intentional in its design. And I also ended up axing the lace that was on the bottom of the skirt and changing it into a patterned lace that went over the fabric of the entire dress to simplify it even more, which is not something I typically do, but I was glad to do it here. So for her hair, I ended up going with some little frilly bangs in the front and some sort of curled intensely at the sides of her cheeks there. I feel like that has a sort of 20s-esque silhouette to the side of it, and then the bottom is sort of like fluffy and short. I ended up adding her tail in last minute. I thought it balanced out the design, and it was just a fun little detail. I also added a sort of like puffy little shawl cover up thing. This is more of just sort of like a scarf and a tied little overskirt on her waist as well, just to add some more detail and break things up while still keeping it fairly simple. I also was debating adding some sort of like moss details to her skin, but ended up not doing it because I wanted to keep the color palette a little bit more simple, and I didn't want her to look like dirty and unused, because I figured it didn't make sense since she is like alive, the way it would make sense on like a stationary gargoyle. So moving on to the line work here, I really like how this line work came out. I think she turned out so cute. I'm like really obsessed with how she came out. So I'm blocking out my colors here. Wanted to keep up with her original color palette, which I don't know if I was given the prompt Daughter of Gargoyle if I would have come up with the pink and blue color palette on my own, and I do try to go at these relatively uninfluenced by what the canon designs are. I kind of try to approach it usually as if I've never seen it before, but I really think it's so iconic and I really wanted to keep it, so I did. So just spacing out the colors here, I wanted to give her skin sort of a like pink and blue contrasting undertone, so that way instead of just being plain gray, it sort of complements the rest of the mild color palette pretty well. Her ears were very fancy and based pretty directly on that one gargoyle I mentioned, but I did add some little fleur-de-lis to the tip. I allowed myself one area to add a lot of detail into. I also gave her these little fingerless lace gloves that have little bows at the top. Just a cute little detail there. I wanted her makeup to also be pretty subtle, so I'm just adding a sort of gradient blush to her lips and some light blue eyeshadow. I also added a little heart locket and a specifically garrote colored rose to the little overskirt that she has, just as cute little references there. Wanted to also incorporate some of the black and white striping that is very associated with French into her design, and some little teardrop water droplet shaped beads throughout her outfit here and there too. Her shoes were really fun to work on. I wanted to be inspired by stained glass windows and very just like intense Gothic architecture, so I have some little swirls on some black leather boots with very intense and sharp heels. I also wanted to add little rounded spikes to her tail to keep her outfit very or her general look overall very rounded, but still have all the little spikes and details associated with the classic monster. I also added in some little crack details here and there throughout her body just to give some more intrigue there. I turned her socks into these little lacy leggings with garters, and I painted a little marble texture on them as a reference to stone. I really like how they came out. I haven't ever drawn the character wearing any sort of leggings like that, and I really like how they look. I think they're really cute. Just adding some blush there because I thought that'd be a cute little detail and help add some blue onto her warm skin tone there. I also wanted to incorporate architecture throughout her belt there, so it's sort of shaped like downward pointing cathedral spires with little circles for the windows. And I did add lace to the overskirt, and since I axed it on the main skirt. I have some pretty saturated little pops of like aqua and magenta throughout, sort of more cyan than aqua, just because old habits die hard, I suppose. But I also have some pale off-white yellows, so her color palette is sort of like a really desaturated red, blue, yellow primary color scheme. Just adding all the little details in here. I also wanted to add on the leggings that she's wearing some bows with these long tassels to give her a more sort of romantic edge to her outfit. I did want her to just be very sort of like romantic and soft and frilly in her look. I felt like it was very cute. It's very classic Rochelle, and it's also a good contrast to what people associate with gargoyles, of them being very sort of like sharp and stony. Here's a fun part. I wanted to design my own sort of fake lace design, so I used a semi-true tool and a thin brush to paint out these little cathedral shapes, and then just created a sort of pattern out of them then copy pasted that onto her dress at a size I thought was appropriate. I imagine this to be sort of a lace overlay on top of plain pink fabric, but a print would work in doll form. I also wanted to keep the boning on the skirt on the exterior to create sort of more visual terms of structure. I did decide that just the cathedrals were a little too boring, so I added some little fleur-de-lis, and then as reference to her G1 skirt, I drew these little lace skulls and arranged them onto her purse. It was really fun doing all these little lace designs, and the total time, by the way, of the redesign and the coloring time was 3 hours and 14 minutes and 48 seconds. I feel like it's a little bit longer than my usual redesigns, but I feel like her design, one, had some sort of trouble with getting the color palette to look just right, because I wanted to make sure everything was like at the same level of saturation. I definitely feel like right now the whites are way too saturated, which is what I'm trying to do here, is I'm trying to balance it out with everything else. But luckily, the final shading and overlays and everything, I think, pulled it together, which is what I'm doing right now. Just sort of making sure everything's shaded. I also wanted to add to the overskirt the texture of sort of like being worn and withered, so I used some paper textured and fluffy brushes to achieve that. I also added some little just free-handed lace drawings and details to her little shawl, just to give it some more visual interest of keeping her outfit down to a very few pieces that would mostly be based with like prints and stuff, just like simple shapes and construction, but with still a lot of like visual interest and frills and laciness that are sort of associated with the coquette and French aesthetic in general. Wanted to add the shine to her leather boots to get across the material that they're made of. I also had a lot of fun doing the little speckles all over her skin, which is such a cute detail from G1, so of course I had to keep it. I usually just use a particle brush on a darker gray setting, and then I go over a lighter gray to create that sort of mottled look. For the background, I used a picture of this church that I saw in Denver once a couple years ago. Just drove past it, and I instantly knew with this product that this was the picture I wanted to use for the background. So I have her sort of set up where she's flying, adding very light details to the background of just sort of like the contrast, because I felt like there was already some pretty good contrast, and I also added some extra holes in the clouds just to break up the solid white overcastness. Now she's finally done, and here is the reveal. I really, really love how she turned out. I think she turned out so cute. This is one of my favorite redesigns that I've done. She still has some neon touches, of course, because it's my style, but I do like that her color palette is a lot more reserved and subtle than I usually go for. And I just really love how she just turned out. Like, she's just so cute. I really, really love how her face turned out, and her body shape and all the flows and everything. I really love it. So here's a comparison now of her G1, G2, and my version of her redesign. I think it's interesting. I didn't do this consciously, but I feel like you can see some influence from Generation 2's Rochelle design in mine. I think I overall still prefer G1, but I think I'm also just very blinded by nostalgia there, because this doll, and specifically G1 Rochelle, means a lot to me. She's very symbolic to me of the early days of collecting. And then, just for fun, I wanted to do a little comparison of this Rochelle that I designed almost 4 years ago exactly, and compare it to my art style now, just to see how my design sensibilities and art style has changed and grown. And I'm really proud of the progress, because I feel like I haven't really been seeing it in my art style reflected the past few years, but it's really fun to see the comparison and see how much I personally think I've improved. Then, of course, we have the lineup, which is now 10 characters strong and is getting quite long and horizontal, so I might have to figure out a new way to break this up soon. Even if you look at the piece itself and think it's saturated, when you compare it to the rest of my art, it is very, very pale and pastel, which is exactly what I was going for, so I'm really happy with that. And again, the first design to not use green, shocker. So here is the final redesign again, and I'm really happy with how she turned out. I hope you all like her as much as I do. And I have something a little bit different to end this video on. It's an announcement of a new voting poll. On my Instagram about a year ago, I held a poll to determine the order of which that I redesigned the Monster High characters in, and I've since gotten a lot more subscribers, and thank you so much for subscribing again. So I wanted to open this up again and sort of redo it, add some new characters in, so that way you guys can have a say in which characters you see redesigned first. And the ones that are of equivalent standing get measured, whether they're third or fourth, etc., based on how many votes they receive, so every vote counts. So make sure to go follow me on my Instagram, where I'll be posting these polls the following days after this video is uploaded. And you can also follow me on my Twitter, or my Instagram, of course, where I post art at least 3 times a month. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!